The Buddha called the truth the Dharma. So what he uncovered when he was enlightened, he called it the Dharma, the truth. Welcome to Dharma Night. I have the great pleasure of welcoming first people attending our Dharma Night for quite some many months. I think the last time was last September, so we're now in May, September, October. So, but we're continuing to record, so a warm welcome to those of you who are tuning into this recording. My name is Amra Pushpa, and tonight we're starting, I guess, the second phase of a theme we started a couple of months ago called The Three Jewels of Buddhism. And it's based on a book written by our teacher, Sangharakshita. And tonight we have been looking at the first jewel, the Buddha jewel, which is the golden jewel. And we've been exploring that the last few months. And tonight we're starting on the second jewel, the Dharma jewel. So just to say a few things about the three jewels. The three jewels are what is at the core of Buddhism. So there's the Buddha, the Dharma that I'm going to start talking about tonight, and then the third jewel is the Sangha, with a red jewel. So tonight's the blue jewel, and we have a lot of blue on the shrine. And so Buddhism obviously starts with the Buddha. And so one of the questions I'm going to look at tonight, so who is the Buddha in relation to the Dharma, and what do we mean by the Dharma? And also, what are ways of approaching the Dharma? So the Dharma in Buddhism has two main meanings. So the first one, both of them relate to this very important historical figure, the Buddha, who lived over 2,500 years ago. So the first way it relates to the Buddha is it relates to the Buddha's enlightenment. So the Buddha, through his enlightenment, just realizing reality the way it truly was. And at that time, he called it the Dharma. And the Dharma, that word, goes way back into ancient India spiritual tradition, which goes back many thousands of years. But what the Buddha did at that time, he would take words that were in circulation and give a new meaning. So the word Dharma is also used in Hinduism, so it goes back to quite ancient Hindu tradition, and it means more like a law or social code, I believe, from a Hindu perspective. But from the Buddhist perspective, the Buddha called the truth the Dharma. So what he uncovered when he was enlightened, he called it the Dharma, the truth. And he's known as the Sambuddha. So he's, as we're going to explore in further weeks, the Buddha, we're going to look at Buddhist cosmology. The Buddha is probably the first enlightened being in our era who uncovered this Dharma. So he didn't invent the Dharma, the truth was there. But through his supreme efforts and achievement, he penetrated, he understood it. And then he had to decide whether to keep it to himself. So there's a big pivotal moment where he wonders, because the truth or reality that we're all, for example, that we're all interconnected, what he realized being so beyond our ordinary conceptual mind, he wondered if anyone would ever understand it, whether he should was it worth making much of an effort? Who is really, it just seemed, it is so counterintuitive the way most people see what they think of as reality. But then he had a vision of, this amazing vision of kind of survey the world with his wisdom eye and seeing human beings like pools of lotuses, and lotuses grow out of the mud, and but then they rise above it, completely clear of the mud. And he saw that there were some people who were like lotuses rising out of the mud or above the mud in different stages, of being receptive, being able to understand what he realized, this Dharma, this truth. And he's also, as part of his realization, realized great compassion. So he decided, there are lots of myths around this that we'll probably look at, that he decided to teach what he discovered, this truth, for the benefit and welfare of the world. And obviously this is a very, very significant moment, because 2,500 years later, there's still many Buddhist traditions, many Buddhists, many people inspired. And we're going to be celebrating this decision in part on Buddha Day, the 19th of May, which is a very important day in the Buddhist calendar. So with this decision to teach, we come to the second meaning of the word Dharma, which is teaching. And so the Buddha taught out of compassion for the world for over 40 years, and he was actually a genius of a teacher, and he traveled on foot for probably hundreds, if not thousands, of miles, and there were many teachers at the time. There were many spiritual teachers. It was a very spiritually rich time. But he had a very unique approach to his teaching. So his approach was that he used the word ehipassiko, that it was the nature of an invitation. He invited you to not just take his word for things, but for you to come in and test the teachings yourself. There's a famous episode where some young men came to the Buddha saying, there's so many teachers, who do we follow? We don't know who's telling the truth, who's a really going to be a very helpful, enlightened teacher. And the Buddha didn't say, oh, follow me, which is a lot the way a lot of the teachers were. He said, well, you have to try it out for yourself. Try it out in your own experience. If it leads to greater, more positive, beneficial mental states, leads to peace, then that is the teaching. That's the teaching you should follow. And he's not saying it's my teaching, but he invites, and it's this continual invitation that Buddhists extend to others to this day. And then he also described his teachings, his many teachings, as a raft. And by raft he means that he was very practical. He said you use these teachings to take you to what nirvana or enlightenment is, sometimes described as the other shore. So going to another shore, that once you get to that shore, you just leave the raft behind. And this is one reason why Buddhism is unique in, I think, compared to many religions, and there isn't any such thing as blasphemy in Buddhism. So you might find a Buddha in a hairstylist or a bar, but people aren't getting all, it's not the same kind of, there's a more of a letting go or letting be around that kind of approach to the teachings. At the same time, reverence and respect is very important in Buddhism. And the Buddha, even when he was enlightened, he said, well, he could see he had achieved something no other living being had achieved. And he said, but everyone needs something to look up to. I need something, and even as an enlightened being, I do. So I'm going to look up to the Dharma, the truth. And we Buddhists look up and revere the Buddha for showing us the way to the truth and for exemplifying that. And so following the Buddha's death, he taught for over 40 years. So there were many, well, obviously thousands of years have followed, and there were different trends and approaches. I'm just going to be able to summarize and touch on a few. that followed the Buddha's death. So he taught orally, nothing was written down, but people had great memories because there was very little written down, and they would memorize by heart a lot of his teachings and hand it down. But it wasn't written down for a good 100, 200 years, and that writing is known as the Pali Canon, and it's written in Pali, the Buddha's original language, and that's, you know, the language we use to salute the shrine. And so his initial followers, the ones that promoted Buddhism, a lot of them were his monk followers or followers who were in the monastic tradition. Originally, the Buddha was kind of like a wanderer, but gradually things settled down and there was more of a monastic tradition. And today, I guess the inheritors of that tradition would be what's known as Theravadan Buddhism. I think maybe you would have heard of that. And that's quite prominent in Thailand and Burma or Myanmar, a few other southeastern countries like Cambodia as well. And but after that initial, you know, revering the word of the Buddha and really paying attention to the word of the Buddha, as often happens in religion, you know, more people came up and thought it had got too rigid and was missing the spirit. So often you get, you know, there's a letter and the spirit of a religious tradition. And so there are other followers of the Buddha who felt, well, you're really missing the spirit of who the Buddha was. And also you're getting too tight around monastic rules. And out of this response and reaction came the second great wave of Buddhism called the Mahayana. It literally means great vehicle. And they labeled the first group of Buddhists, the Hinayana, the lesser vehicle, which is a bit disparaging. So I think, and the Theravadins, the only one who came from that school, you know, the only group that have survived to this day from the Hinayana. But essentially the Mahayana, what's at the pith of the Mahayana is a great altruistic outlook. And their view of the first Buddhists was that they were just interested in achieving enlightenment for themselves, and they'd missed wanting to bring it out to the world and to all beings. And this is kind of a false idea, I suppose you could say, because to gain enlightenment in self, you transcend the self, and so there's no way you could just want it for yourself. But anyway, it's a kind of fiction, but gave rise to very, very beautiful, poetic, lots of colors and images that you probably see today that's flowered into many, many traditions. So that includes starting in India, you know, so Buddhism died out in India, but it went to initially Tibet, China, Japan. Yeah, I'm sure there are other countries I'm not mentioning, but you know, those are a few. And then obviously there are sub-religions that came out of that, such as Zen. I think Zen's quite well known in the West, probably the first form of Buddhism that came to the West. So then from there, the third great school of Buddhism. So each great school was about 500 years. From the Mahayana, which was stressing the poetic, the mythical, the altruistic, came the last great school called the Vajrayana, Vajra meaning the diamonds school, I guess, also known as the Mantrayana. So mantra is a great focus in this school. And I suppose if you look at the pith of each of these schools, I think the first school of the monastics is renunciation. So the monastics would kind of withdraw from the world. The second school is altruism. This third school is more about transformation and transformation of energy. And what's known as the Tantra, so that's quite a well-known word in the West, is a part of that. And Tantra is such a vast word, but it goes back to ancient India and loosely could be described to refer to magical spells, rituals, incantations. I mean, it has associations with different pagan sects, but it also, in Tantric Buddhism, it relates to energy, using energy. So energy for transformation, bringing the spiritual life into the practical, day-to-day, experiential. So this started in India, but it's really flowered the most in Tibetan Buddhism. But I suppose another trend of Buddhism is that every country Buddhism went to, and it went to different geographical places where there was very little communication between each place historically. So it developed in very unique ways in these different countries. But it never tried to wipe out the religion that was there at the time. So that's another reason Buddhist tradition is quite rich, and Tibetan Buddhism in particular really incorporated the Bon tradition, which is more of a pagan tradition there. So from a Westerner's point of view, it can be very, very confusing, all these different manifestations, and where do you start? And in Triratna, which by the way means 3 jewels, our teacher Sangharachita, who is was English, and he discovered he was a Buddhist at a young age, and wandered through India. Well, it's a long story, but he wandered through India in search of ordination, and he eventually became ordained in these 3 great schools of Buddhism. So he was ordained as a Theravadan monk, but then was initiated into the Mahayana, and for a good number of years, I think 15 years, was living in a part of India where a lot of the great Tibetan Buddhist teachers fleeing Tibet came to settle. So he met some of the great Tibetan Buddhist teachers. So he's initiated, he has a lot of knowledge in that. And from that, he came here and started a more of a Western, so Buddhism meeting the West. And there's a lot we could say about that. But how he distilled all these vast traditions was coming back to what's known as basic Buddhism. So to get back to what's in common with all these traditions, what did the Buddha initially teach? And there are some basic essential teachings that you could just take 1 or 2 of them and you could spend a lifetime practicing. And, he says that's really what we need, and his approach is ecumenical in that there are great teachings in all these other traditions, but we get rooted back to the Buddha. So, I'm taking us on quite a tour. I'll just say 1 or 2 last things about, what is basic Buddhism? What is the heart of the Dharma, what the Buddha taught? And our teacher would say it's what's known as conditioned co-arising, or conditioned codependent arising. Praticca samuppada, very, very famous word in Buddhism. And this can be seen as a quite easy teaching if you take it from a materialistic point of view, that, things have causes and effect. There was at one point, I remember someone talking about a butterfly flapping their wings in a forest and it rippling her out and having lots of effect. So we can think this co-arising, that everything affects each other with conditions. We can take it from a materialistic point of view, can feel quite logical. But what the Buddha was really talking about, so this is at the pith of all his teachings. What the Buddha says, no, it's far more subtle than that. It's not just material things interacting, causing an effect. It's also the way we perceive, the way our views are, all the conditions around that. And I'll just read end with a short quote from a Western Buddhist teacher that she says, integral to this concept of dependent co-arising is the belief that preconceptions and predispositions of the mind itself shape the reality that it sees. So that's quite subtle. It's not this logical cause and effect in material world. It's very hard to understand. A genuine understanding of mutual causality involves a transcendence of this separation between self and world, which amounts to an overhauling of one's most ingrained assumptions. So that's quite a whistle-stop tour through the Dharma, but hope you will tune in and come for this series, because we'll be continuing to look at different aspects. So I'm now going to turn to my friend Virinaga, see what you think.
Really enjoyed that. Somehow you managed to capture like 2,500 years of Buddhist history in a 10-minute talk, which is
how I did that.
rather remarkable. So thank you. The one thing that kind of was missing a little bit for me was why the Buddha started his quest in the first place. I was thinking about the 4 sights. I don't know if you could say a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, I think we talked about that in the Buddha Jewel section, but I thought the Buddha was looking for an answer to suffering, the human predicament of human suffering. And the myth is he led a life where he had everything material anyone could have wanted for that time, lived in a palace, etc. And he was very sheltered, and then he had this meeting. I guess that perhaps most of us can remember when we got to be teenage or adolescents, all of a sudden taking in the truth of old age, sickness and death. And he had that experience. And instead of just kind of getting on with life and you kind of get used to it, he said, no, I've got to find an answer to this. There must be a way out of this predicament of impermanence. And those are the first 3 sights. The 4th sight was seeing a wandering spiritual teacher and deciding, to go forth into that culture at the time, which is, you shave your head, you just have a begging bowl, and society at that time would support these wandering spiritual teachers.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, thank you.
Well, I was just thinking, it's kind of, it's like, what's the? I'll tell you a little story because on our YouTube channel, people can write comments, and
Yes.
I had a comment from someone called God's Final Messenger the other day, who's clearly a Christian, who was commenting on one of the talks that we've given at these Dharma Nights. But they're very polite, so they weren't trolling us. So I thought, okay, I'll write
Yes.
back. But his basic point was like, he was saying that the trouble with the Buddha, the trouble with the Buddha's teaching, is that although it seems to be, he even said it seemed to be true, the Buddha didn't explain why it's true. Didn't explain why it's true. And I sort of thought, much like, it's interesting, you mentioned quite a lot of it, and I wrote back and actually saying, well, I agree with you. The Buddha was mainly quite practical. He was mainly, he wasn't interested in why there is suffering or why the teachings work. He was mainly interested in, what works?
Yes.
What works?
What relieves suffering?
Yeah. What actually? Yeah. So and actually, I even wrote in the thing you said around trying out in your own experience.
Yes. Yes.
Because fundamentally, how are we to know what is right? What's going to help in terms of our path, other than our own kind of, or does it work for us in a way?
Yeah, it kind of throws us back on taking responsibility for ourselves and. Not saying I'm following what this teacher is telling me to do. We have to step up, and and this core of conditioned co-arising, comes into ethics. So ethics are really important in Buddhism, but and the law of karma, that so that if we do something that is harmful, well, it has an effect, and it decreases our happiness. And so again, it's quite practical. So what conduces to making us happier? But it's kind of not a rule, or a commandment handing down. They're like precepts or principles that you have to reflect on, and reflect on what your intentions are. So again, owning what your state of mind is, rather than saying, "Oh well, this is the rule. I have to follow it," which is always, to me, is always going to lead to some kind of reaction.
I mean, that's like where you're starting to, like you said, get into the subtlety of Buddhism, aren't you? It's not necessarily about following teachings or following rules, but rather what's the most kind of useful or skillful thing in the given situation.
That's right.
In relation to what it means for us and our perception and our reality. Which is, I think another reason why you get these almost contrasting schools. You get some schools of Buddhism which say it's all down to you, and it's all up to your practice, and you shouldn't rely on any others. And then you get another school saying, well, it's all down to a higher power, and you just worship a bodhisattva, Amitabha, and just...
well, that's one school.
That's one school.
Yes, that's one school. I wouldn't say it's basic, that one school would be basic Buddhism.
Yeah, but you do
it's an approach, though.
You do get different contrasting approaches, don't you?
That's true. That's true.
And they're all... I find it really fascinating that they can somehow all be true.
Yes.
None of them are wrong.
That's right.
It's all a matter of kind of perspective, or
That's right.
a matter of approach.
That's right. Because there's those three other approaches, aren't there? There's the developmental, there's the receptive, and then there's that's surrender.
Oh yeah, that's
yes.
Right.
So
well,
that's.
In fact, there's a fourth, isn't there, as well now? There's. You're talking about the three myths, aren't you?
The myths.
The three myths.
Yes.
So like a developmental model, a model of discovery.
Yes, discovery.
A model of emergence, which is where it's sort of internal.
Well remembered.
You're opening up, and then a model of discovery, emergence. God, how embarrassing!
Yes,
I can't remember the fourth one.
I mean, I think one thing with Buddhism is full of formulas and teachings, and at the time of the Buddhist. The culture was there was quite a stress on counting at that time. There was a whole science of counting, and I think because people needed to remember things, that's why they came up with lots of lists of things, and I think we carry on doing that because it is quite helpful to have some kind of pithy thing to refer to. But at the same time, we could get a bit overwhelmed with how many teachings we need to know, when really these essential teachings like the Four Noble Truths, which again is, it's the truth of suffering, which is at the root of what the Buddha was trying to find an answer to, and then the cause, the cure, like a medical formula, and then how so again this whole structure around things rising and falling in relation to everything else rising and falling, and it all being impermanent and changing, and then applying it in very powerful teachings.
And you don't need to know very much, do you?
No.
You just need to know a bit.
Yes. Well, that's how one of the Pure Land, you were talking about, some traditions of Buddhism that focus on just chanting a mantra. And that came about, there was a monk called Shinran who wanted to bring Buddhism to people who weren't educated, to poor fisher people. And he just taught them a mantra, the Amida mantra, and the Imbitsu, I think, and they chant it. So there's a certain surrender that goes on with that, and it can be a very effective way in as well. Yeah, that's more related, I guess, to the Vajrayana, the Tantra. Using mantra and sound and experience.
It's sort of it makes me think there's a sort of a school or an approach of Buddhism for everybody.
Yes,
you know,
that's right. That's true.
You know, it's
that's
like
true.
There's a universality about it. You can
Yes.
find an approach that works for you somewhere.
It's true, and I think that's why it wasn't until I came to Triratna, because it opens us up to the whole spectrum. Whereas, you know, there are some Buddhist schools, you know, like you find in all religions, saying our approach is the best. You know, like the Mahayanas and even the Vajrayana, which came the latest. They were saying we're the highest. You know that they start with the Hinayana, then the Mahayana, and then we're the highest. And our teacher would say they're all very profound. They all have equal potential for gaining enlightenment. So it's I much prefer this approach. And with the orientation to the culture Buddhism is meeting right now, which is our Western culture, where the arts are very developed, so that, Buddhism will meet a very different culture of arts and all sorts of and science in a different kind of way. Yeah,
very much so. Yeah. Good. Should we wrap up this section?
Sure. Yep.
Great. Great. So I hope you enjoyed that Dharma Night talk. So if you did enjoy it, if you're enjoying our videos, I just want to ask you or encourage you to think about making a donation to the Brixton Buddhist community. We're a UK charity that relies completely on your donations to run everything here. And if this was a class, a meditation class, there'd be a donation bowl that you could just put in £10 at the end of the night to help support the activities. But as you're watching this online, I just want to ask you to think about making an online donation. If you've watched 4 or 5 videos this month, maybe you might want to think about giving £10. So there's a link in the description below where you can go to our website and make a donation. And if you want to keep giving, you don't want to worry about making that donation every month, well, you could just set up a standing order, a monthly standing order. That would be really, really helpful. I want to suggest something of the region of maybe £10 or £20 a month if you're able to do that, and that would be really, really helpful and help us keep producing videos like this one. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.